Hopefully you can see my Rembrandt there or whatever he is.
Shakespeare.
It's not even that. This is actually it's a picture that a lot of people think of as Shakespeare, but it's really just a caricature called the Bard. And I don't know if Shakespeare actually looked like this or not. I could never be clear, but nonetheless, the idea is here. So again, this is amateur authorship submitting preparing and submitting an article for publication. I guess the first question you'd ask yourself is why would you want to do this? Because it's really not an easy task. I found that the amount of time that it excuse me takes to put together a modeling project while you're also taking photographs and trying to remember everything that you're going to write extends that modeling experience out probably 2 or 3 or 4 times what it would take if you just built the thing. But nonetheless, it's number one, it's fun and gratifying to do this. You're a creative person to begin with. You're creating in various different dimensions artistically, and if you can do that successfully, there's you're probably okay at putting together a presentation or writing about it. The second one is you really learn your subject. Years ago, I learned that the best way to really know your subject is to explain it to other people in a sort of a how-to process. I learned that when I was an accounting student, and I tutored lower division accounting uh, students in my spare time. And by me explaining the ins and the outs of the general ledger and the various journal entries that had to take place to make it all come together, I found that I had developed an expertise that I wouldn't have otherwise. And this applies to any discipline, I'm pretty sure. But certainly in this case, if you can, got something in my throat here. Sorry. If you can put together a how-to article that people can actually read and follow and do something, then you've kind of cemented that process in your brain, so you know the material better. The third reason is that you can serve your hobby this way. This is a way to, I guess, I hate the term give back, but that's really what this is. Uh, you're sharing your portion of the hobby, as obvious as it may seem to you, how to do something or how to figure something out or whatever the subject might be. There's going to be somebody else out there who's going to see an aha moment when they hear about how you did it or what you did. And this is your way that you can actually serve the hobby and help people other than yourself enjoy it greatly. And fourth, and probably least important, is that you can gain recognition from others in the hobby. And that alludes specifically to the NMRA achievement program for the model railroad author. Another reason that I kind of think is cool is that editors will absolutely love you. They really wish that articles would grow on trees, but they don't. As an editor, I have to rely on what I get over the transom or from repeat authors. So anything that comes in is a welcome submission as far as I'm concerned. I don't know that the major publications uh, really respond in this way, but they claim to. Every once in a while, you'll see a plea from the editor of RMC or Model Railroader or somewhere to submit your work because they're soliciting content. But it kind of flies in the face of what they do with it, it seems to me, when you send stuff in and you never hear from them. But nonetheless, this is true. As a divisional publication, I mean a regional publication, um, I definitely appreciate any content that comes in. So that's another reason to do it. Help out your poor editor. So where do you get ideas? There's all kinds of ways to do this, but I think probably one of the best is to look around your layout or someone else's layout for a scene or a vignette or some other thing that really piques your interest. And you could come up with an idea for a story. In this case, we're looking at a picture of Walt Shedler's Dunsmuir uh, stop on his Southern Pacific layout. And there's a picture here, I mean, a story here I think you can see a little Volkswagen bus in the lower left-hand corner. There's a smattering of people on the deck. There's a rail diesel car waiting. There's all kinds of things. I think it's called getting ready to board the train or station stop or something like that. But I looked at it a little differently. I know that this is in Dunsmuir, California, which is between Redding and the Oregon border. Um, it's a division point, still is, in fact. But the interesting thing is that this is the Southern Pacific rail diesel car, and SP had only one. It was the SP-10. It finished its career on the Northwestern Pacific. Last time I recall, it was I saw it actually in person in Willits. So far as I know, it never made it to the West Valley branch or the East Valley branch or anything north of Redding. It was never on that part. So my question in this, which could really put together an interesting story, is why would this SP-10 be visiting Dunsmuir? It certainly never had. So I think that in itself is a story. I had a lot of fun chiding Walter about this when I saw the photo. Oops, a little too far here. If you ever watched Dobie Gillis, you're familiar with this statue. This is called the Thinker. And here's another way to come up with ideas. Just think about what you're planning to build. The example I'll use a little later on is starting to build some bench work. And what do you need to do that is figure out, the plans in your head, how it's going to come together, what materials you're going to need, what tools, and that sort of thing. But you can put this line of thinking on just about anything that you're planning to do. Currently, I'm building a little railroad station from scratch, and I'm trying to think through every process for every little detail, from pouring the foundation out of casting plaster to lighting the super or the ceilings and so forth when it's ready to go together. So I'm thinking about this all along, and at the same time, I'm generating ideas for an article, which I'll probably never put together, but nonetheless, thinking about these kinds of things can give you a plan for an article you might want to put together. Another thing is to think outside the box a little bit. Or the different types of tools you might be using is the example I'm using here. Um, one of the clever things that I saw was you can see the picture down here. It's a combination square with two squares on it, and you wouldn't think of taking two of these things and putting them together necessarily, like you see here. But somebody came up with this idea and put a little article in one of the publications. It was either RMC or Model Railroader about how this thing would work to help you keep buildings square on your work surface when you're putting them together. It just makes a lot of sense. It also makes a nice clamp to hold everything together. And I've actually done this. It worked great, and it was a good idea. Perhaps you can be clever as well and come up with something like that. And this is a perfect subject for a little short thing. Maybe a good way to get started, get your feet wet with something like this. Oops. The other thing that you can do is read everything. Now, I've listed a lot of examples of model railroad publications here that you can look at. You probably are familiar with all of them. The smaller ones are our division newsletters. There's Call Board, the Observation, and I think there's a Coast Dispatch in there. And then, of course, my favorite is the Sierra Division Shortline. But you can also read about other things too. Uh, it's it's just good to read because you learn styles and you learn what doesn't work, and that's probably the best way to do it. Imagine trying to oh be a musician in a symphony orchestra or something, and you've never ever listened to classical music. This is the same concept here. You really need to read in order to write. The other thing is the submission guidelines. They're all over the place, but next slide or so, there's going to be a list of them for the major publications and also one for the PCR branch line. This is a very important that you follow the guidelines of the publication that you wish to submit to, because if you miss a couple little details, you're not even going to bother to look at it. They have a set format and a certain amount of time to work through these articles, determine which ones they want and where they're going to place them. And if you're not helping them by not following their submissions guidelines, your chances of being published are really, really poor. Here's a list of the different guidelines. There's a link for each one of these on here, and you'll find that these are the four major ones that I came up with. We should all be familiar with the NMRA magazine and the two major publications, and then the Railroad Hobbyist is an online publication that most of us are familiar with. Mm-hmm. If you request a PDF of this presentation, the links should be hyperlinks for you, so you can just click on these and let them go. So that'll take you to these. These are current. I checked them all yesterday. Unless somebody updated their submission guidelines overnight, these should be current. Again, you can get those if you ask for a copy of this this presentation. And you can certainly get my guidelines just by emailing me. My number is here, as well as my email address. If for some reason you lose this, you can find me on page 2 of the branch line in the call board. I'm easy to get to, and usually I respond immediately when I see these things. And I do have a little thing that'll help you work your way through what I like to have. And my submission guidelines are not nearly as strict as the national publications, but nonetheless, it'd be great if you could follow what I've suggested. Probably the most critical thing about all of this is getting good photographs, legible photographs that can be used and clearly reproduced in the publication. You can have horrible prose and bad spelling and bad grammar and all that kind of stuff, but I can work with that. I can clean that up. Any editor can do that. But if the pictures are not good, there's nothing I can do to help you. And if you don't submit decent, good, clear photos in the proper resolution required for the publication, the article is not of much use, because a picture is indeed worth 1,000 words. Definitely is. It used to be that you needed a good digital SLR. Not so much anymore, because the digital phones, your cell phones with digital cameras on them, have advanced to the point where they can do an awful lot of the heavy lifting these days.
Yeah.
There's certainly some close-up work that you definitely want to use this type of a camera for, particularly if you're going to use a macro lens to look at some little small items. But for the most part, I found that with a cell phone, I can get down at track level and take pictures that I had no way I could do with a big bulky body camera like this. So actually being able to use both is going to be good. Again, they used to not be the best, but now absolutely are. In fact, there's a fellow who advocates the use of, well, there's probably several fellows that advocate the use of digital cell phones for almost all of the railroad photography that they do. And tell your story with the photos. I've got an example here of how this works. This was something that was in the division short line years ago. Jim Collins, some of you may know him, submitted an article about converting a Western Pacific tender from coal to oil. In our neck of the woods, the WP didn't burn coal at all. It was all oil here. There's a few spots, I think, in east of us that the Western Pacific might have used coal, but for the most part, their steam locomotives were oil burners. So there was a need for him to change this. And even without any text, he goes from one photo to the next, and each one shows a different step in the process and actually tells the story from beginning to end. It's kind of hard to see, but in the very first photo up there, it shows the existing coal load. and going through the process of cutting it out, doing a little modification, adding a new top, adding a hatch, and all that, you end up with the tender at the bottom that is pretty accurate for a Western Pacific oil burning tender. The words are not even needed here. You can tell what's going on just by looking at the pictures. This is looks like a kind of top half of this has been truncated. You probably heard of Brooks Stover. He models in S scale, and he's put all kinds of articles in all the publications. But he has a thing that it's called shoot, a Model Railroader's Guide to Digital Photography. This came out, I don't know how long ago, but it's probably the best, most practical way to talk about using a cell phone for your photographs. Another thing I ran across recently was Jack Burgess, and in this little clinic, he talks about using the smartphone and an iPad and some photo stacking. Another one is Ed Meriam has a clinic that he did probably 1 or 2 years ago on this same thing on photo stacking. Both of those are good references along with the Brooks Stover publication. You can go to the NMRA website. There's a link here that will send you to all kinds of clinics and other things that deal with photography. I noticed when I ran this link that it takes you to a limited amount of photography articles, but if you're signed in as a member, you can go here and you're going to get a lot more of them. So keep that in mind if you decide to go there. RMC has a department, they call it the company photographer. I think it's every other month in their publication. There's a thing about photography by this fellow that has been a professional photographer and provides some interesting articles, really wonderful stuff. If you're interested in his perspective, take a look at RMC and find the company photographer. Model Railroader has this one I think this is I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote this, but this is an excellent video. I think it's about an hour long. It's a clinic format that you can also find a lot of tips on photography. And of course, you can also hire a professional photographer if you don't want to do all of that. The point is that submission to a publication has to have good photos. Without it, you're sunk. So, writing the article. Okay, you've got this idea. You know what you're going to do. You have a pretty good idea of what the photos are going to be as you go. You take a lot of them during the building process. But how do you get started with the actual text and that sort of thing? Just sitting there looking at a blank page can be very, very intimidating. You're probably envisioning the whole work completed, but you haven't even begun to start. So there's some certain steps you can go through to break the ice, so to speak, or get through the writer's block. First thing to do is kind of a version of what we used to call brainstorming, where people would sit around with a whiteboard and throw all kinds of data and information at it. And none of it had to really make sense. It was just getting ideas from everybody in the group. Well, here's what you can do on your own. Just take a sheet of paper and write down everything you can think of that might have to do with the article that you're writing. Just get it down there, get as much as possible. Doesn't need to be in any order. Doesn't need to make any particular sense. One clause doesn't have to lead to the other and so forth, but you've got it all out there. And what this will do, just writing the stuff down is the first step to get the things out of your brain and onto the paper. It sounds kind of hocus pocus to do this, but it actually works. This is the first step in the creative process when it comes to writing something. Once you've got all the tidbits, then you can begin to organize them, perhaps in the form of an outline. In this case, I'm talking about building bench work for a model railroad. So I want to consider the planning considerations. How high is it going to be? What the aisle width is going to be? What type of construction is it going to be? Is it going to be portable? Is it going to be permanent? What do I need to do to make it portable? What materials am I going to use? Um, what tools am I going to have to borrow or steal or whatever? And once you've got that outline, you can begin fleshing in your article. Now, not every article really needs an outline. We talked a little bit about the short article that was just an idea about some tool that you're going to use that isn't normally part of your toolbox. You want to share that with somebody. That's a very short article, and outlining that would be kind of ridiculous. So it's not always necessary. In a major modeling project, it's probably a must, but for those little things, not so much. And I'll just offer this to anybody who's interested. Um, you don't have to be a good writer. You don't have to actually do any of the outlining, but you can just give us an idea and we can work together to come up with what the article might look like. You may not want to go to the trouble to write all of it, but if you have a lot of good ideas and a lot of interesting points on how it could go together, um, we can work together and come up with an article that we can publish. Back to Jim Collins, the one who did the tender with the modification. I interviewed him. He's a professional technical writer, and I wanted to know some of his thinking about how he comes up with articles and how he writes them. Of course, he is actually being hired to write uh, how-to manuals for the professional world, but he has some good ideas here. He talks a little bit about the use of outline, and he says it is dependent upon the scope of the project. Clearly, the little tiny ones don't need them, but the large ones do. Then he says you want to make sure that you draft in the proper order, and you can do this editing process. He's talking about making 2 or 3 passes and what you do with the first pass, the second pass, and the third pass. And here he suggests that you start with looking for the mechanics to begin with, spelling errors, and finally grammar. This is his way of doing it. And he noted that formats such as the short line and the branch line, he talks about the use of a point and shoot camera, a digital camera, or a cell phone. And this is basically mirrors what I said before about the cameras. And finally, he's got some pretty good advice and how to actually uh, take the best pictures and how to make yourself sound the way you want to, as far as being in the first person, second person, or third person. Finally, you want to assemble all of this, and you need to be able to submit it in some format that can be used by the publication. I just noticed a couple here that I had when I put this thing together years ago. The two probably most popular at the time were the Microsoft Word, and I believe WordPerfect is a Corel product. The other way that a lot of people ask you to submit it is in the body of the text of the email itself. The thing is to be able to help the editor to transcribe your work into the actual publication without having to do a lot of typing. You need to be sure when in your text or some other way that you indicate where the pictures probably should be and what the captions should be. So a little outline like you see here is really helpful. I sometimes get these from people, and a lot of times I don't. And the ones where I get these make editing the thing and putting the pictures in the right place a much simpler job. And finally, we probably all know this now that you need to have a way to move your files. Generally, they're not going to be able to be emailed easily. So using Dropsend or Dropbox or something like that, what is it, Google Drive or Google Share or something, is the way to go. You could also put it on a thumb drive and mail it if you chose to. But emailing probably isn't going to work if you've got an article of any substance. These things are little thumbnails of the photos, so you can help the editor get an idea what it is that you're talking about with a little tiny caption so that they'll be able to recognize what this picture is and how it matches up with the captions that they put into the text. This is helpful because sometimes you don't know for sure which photo matches which caption. This takes the mystery out of it entirely. Then we have the achievement program. You're probably familiar with this. I mentioned it earlier. This is the Model Railroad Author. You can find these things on the NMRA website, and it just shows the number of points you can get for publishing things in a national, a regional, and a divisional publication. And there's also, you can put together clinics and present them. If you do something electronically, like I'm doing now, there's points available for that. When these categories were originally, the criteria was designed, we didn't have a lot of digital anything at that point. So electronic publications are now a part of this and have been for some time. This is a pretty easy certificate to pick up. And I notice as I look at the new NMRA master modelers that show national model master model railroaders, excuse me, that show up every month. They almost all have this as one of their certificates. In many cases, it happens to be the first one. I've heard it said that the paperwork is the most intimidating part of the process for any certificate. Um, it may seem to be that way, but I think the NMRA has simplified it to the degree that it's really not as difficult as some people seem to think it is. Organizing what you've done is probably the first step here. Transcribing it into a form is pretty darn simple. There's really pretty easy way to go here. Now, you see these different things. These happen to pertain to this model railroad author. You'll find that the other AP categories have very similar forms, if not identical. I put together a Excel version of this. This is well, it's called a record and validation form. I know it's got a number of its own, but I did this in Excel so I can easily do all the math and get everything in order and make it clear. This is something I have this template if you choose to go this route with any of the AP certificates. I'd be more than happy to send this template to you, and you can use it to record your work on whatever certificate it is that you're pursuing. In this case, I added that template to this one, and these are exhibit tags. In the model railroad author category, you need to send in clear photocopies or tear sheets or something from the different publications. And these numbers correspond with the list that I just showed. And these are little tags that you can stick with each one of those exhibits so that whoever is reviewing this will know exactly what it is that they're looking at. Here's another interesting video that I ran into. This was, oh shoot, I don't know when this came out, but this is part of it actually is a clinic that was presented at a national convention by Cynthia Priest, who is the editor of the NMRA magazine. If you follow this link, you're going to have to enter your NMRA password and username to get to it because it is user material and it's not open to the general public. But this is an excellent article that kind of mimics what I'm saying here and is certainly a little more thorough. And it's from a professional editor as well. And that, gentlemen, is my presentation. Again, there's some good information and some good links here. And I think you would get quite a bit of use from looking this over if you have any desire to submit a publication. Again, my email is chipmeriam@comcast.net. I can be found on page 2 in the call board of the PCR branch line. All it takes is a simple email or a phone call, and I'll be happy to send a PDF of this presentation and anything else that you might want as far as publication guidelines or answer any questions. So that, my friends, is my presentation, and I'll field any questions if there are any.
All right, don't forget to unmute yourself, and it looks like Frank has got the floor.
Yeah, Chip, one thing I want to add, you need to, when they send you a markup of how they've edited it, you need to review it very closely. I had one time with one magazine, doesn't matter which one, national, and they changed around things so much that it made no sense if you were building it. So I had to go in and make changes and send them back, and then I wanted to see it again. It took a long time, but they finally got it right. So I really suggest doing that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I've had the same experience, actually not in the model railroad realm, but it made me look like an idiot had I let it go.
Yeah.
It just, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thanks for having
Chip,
me,
if I
guys.
may,
Sure.
one thing I found is that I was able to take skills I had developed in my professional life, writing for work and at work, and a lot of that stuff just transferred right over to writing for the hobby press, because good writing is good writing, you know, all those sorts of things. And so don't be afraid to say, well, how did I do it when I was writing something for work? It's not like you have to start afresh. I wrote for years for trade publications and so on, and so it all was very useful for me in terms of starting to write for the model railroading publications.
I agree. That's that excellent training for anybody. Not only just the written word, but also public speaking, as I'm sure you could attest as well, David.
Oh, yes. And the one other thing that I don't know, Chip, how you or Bob Gardine are on this, but uh, the passive voice is really hard to break in the professional world. It's almost habitual, but I think particularly for hobby writing, first person, and also I just think about, okay, I'm sitting in front of some guy, right? Somebody, other modeler, and I'm saying, okay, now this is how I did this. Look at this, and just imagine you're conversing with somebody and turn that conversation into text, and you're off and running.
Yeah, I think you'll find that in a how-to article, like I'm suggesting a lot of us might want to jump into, the first person is most appropriate. Where you can also get tripped up is if you're talking in the first person and all of a sudden you switch to second or third, and where you're actually straight on, now you're passive. The other area where people get tripped up, and I have to follow pretty closely when I'm editing, is the tense will change frequently back and forth, or um, the plurality will change from single to many and back and forth without the writer having thought about what they said the sentence earlier. They go from "I did this" to "we thought that," and it's just to me, it's like listening to a piece of music and hearing a note that's out of tune. It just causes a dissonance. After a while, it's just there. It's easy to spot if you're attuned to it. So, David, that's an excellent comment. I agree with that. And Bob, I think you would say the same, would you not?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important too is to keep sentences short and crisp. It's very easy in conversations to have, 100-word sentences. But if you're trying to help somebody understand how to build something or why they want to do something or a new idea, it's important to keep them short and crisp. So I'm a big believer in short sentences and stop with the conjunctions. Just sort of do that.
Agree. Being concise and precise is the name of the game. I'm sure you see a lot of it. I know I do. I see a lot of run-on sentences with lots of commas, and it as a reader, it gets a bit laborious to try to get through that. So
I'd like to just suggest one other thing in a way, sort of self-serving, because I'm doing Coast Division. I don't want to step. I really appreciate what you've done for Branchline, but I think all of us have tools and methods and things that we've figured out how to do that we can share with each other. And the audience of this publication is largely seasoned model railroaders. These are not going, to people, teenagers who are just starting for the very first time generally. And so I think a lot of us have some really interesting and useful tips or tricks or adaptations. I took an inexpensive micromark table saw and made a little table saw out of it. And so this is a little one pager in the making, because this is it wasn't very useful as a $49 standalone saw, but it's a really great tool with a bed next to it. So there's all kinds of things that we've done already that are probably next to you on your right or on your left. So if you wanted to make an article, that's something that somebody else could benefit from. David Gibbons' input to me was, think about helping other people in the hobby and sharing what you've learned, because the way I look at it is everything I'm doing, I appreciate the NMRA for everything I learned from everybody around me. So it's just an opportunity to give back. So I appreciate what you've done, Chip, and you did a great clinic. So thank you.
thank you. I appreciate that. And that's a good illustration of what I said in the beginning about giving back to the hobby. One of the reasons that you want to write an article is to share it with your peers, basically. And along those lines, Bob, I do have space in the upcoming branch line for a few words on your kit bash table saw. So you know how to find me. Be
Excellent.
great fun to look at. I'm sure the other divisions in the PCR would like to have you share that with them as well. So
Awesome.
great. I'll look forward to it.
Do we have any other questions for our presenter?
I was just going to point out that I do this sort of crazy thing with a blog spot just to keep my writing skills up for short articles. Maybe a few of you might have seen it, but it's a way to keep doing it. Now, the worst thing I ever did was a 70-page master's thesis in history,
Oh,
and it wound up in the Library of Congress.
Not all of us can say that.
yeah, but it was all about Southern Pacific oil tenders used from 1920 to 1922, Ken.
Actually, it had to do with the Southern Pacific and the history of New Zealand.
All right. Okay.
Thank you for watching this Coast Division eClinic. More Coast eClinics can be found on the Coast Division YouTube channel.